everybody. This is T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Oracle of the Self. Today, we're going to begin our discussion on critical thinking. So, those of you that are keeping track, this is exploration number 7, or the 7th life situation that we've chosen to take a deep dive into. This one is going to be a little bit different than the others in that there are a lot of subtopics that have to be touched upon before we can really get into the real subject of critical thinking. And I'll explain why that is as we work our way through this. As we start on this, I'll ask everyone if you're currently unmuted, go ahead, please make sure you mute your line. And if you've got something you'd like to contribute, just unmute and chime in whenever you might like. But for the sake of the quality in the recording, it's always good if people are muted when they're not speaking. Okay. So now this program that we're doing on critical thinking is actually something we've done for many, many years under a variety of different titles, depending on, what the client wanted or what the promoter wanted us to be addressing in our presentations. And so they're all variations on our actually named program Precision Decisions. How do you go about making the highest quality decisions you possibly can in the most reasonable time frame that you can manage? And so the Precision Decisions program, if you did the whole thing, would probably take, oh my gosh, between a week and a half and 2 weeks. Because of all the exercises that are involved, et cetera. And so we're just taking excerpts from this big Precision Decisions program and bringing it to your guys' attention. And so I don't know how long this is going to take for us to do, but just consider it to be our subject matter for the next several weeks. So we're doing discovery sessions right now. You guys know that during a discovery session, what I like to do is to just present what this life situation is really all about. Put out that little guiding sort of question that we're going to be focusing on as our conversations progress. Now, after the discovery session part is done, now the question becomes, how ready are all of you to apply what you've learned in the discovery sessions to your actual daily life? And that's when we pull into play a ChangeWorks profile. So at a certain point in time, you're all going to receive a link that invites you to complete the profile. Obviously, for those of you who are new to it, it's absolutely free. There's nothing like that. You fill this thing out. It gives you your results immediately. And then we spend several weeks going through the interpretation sessions. How do you go about understanding what your ChangeWorks profiles actually revealed about you when it came to all of these skills and elements around the subject of critical thinking? So that usually takes us a good few weeks to work our way through that. But this is going to culminate in a different place. Usually after we finish the interpretation sessions, we talk about some action planning. We move on to the next life situation. This one requires, I think, a deeper level of experience for it to actually lock in. And so I'm going to put you through a series of tests that are designed to provoke you. Those provocations are really there to see how much have you learned from the discovery sessions and how much have you kind of progressed as you've looked at your results of your ChangeWorks profile and applied the remedies to each of those different growth opportunities it revealed. So I got to make sure that you can hold yourself in the right state of mind if you really want to have any success whatsoever at critical thinking. So there are a lot of programs out there on the subject of critical thinking, dating back not less than 2 decades, and again, using different labels for it. Far, far, far before that. So critical thinking is not something that's new or anything like that. There are many, many, many people out there doing training programs, workshops, consulting gigs around the subject of critical thinking. It sells books, it fills webinars, it does all those kinds of things. But I see within what's being put out there some inherent flaws. And is those inherent flaws, which is where we will begin. So with that kind of thrown out there, let me say that one of the first flaws that I've noticed is that people can't seem to settle on a single definition of what critical thinking even is. And because they are less than clear in their definition of critical thinking, it's ended up widening the possible definitions of critical thinking, so much so that it embraces a lot of things that critical thinking really isn't all about. And so it's just gotten kind of muddied, as so many of these popular topics tend to be over the course of people, glomming onto them, developing practices, et cetera, around it. And so I want to make sure that we can cut to what really is at the core of critical thinking, and where or under what circumstances you are going to do the best job of that critical thinking. So with that, let me throw out a definition. A definition is simply a blending of elements of lots of definitions you could easily find if you Googled this or Chat GPT'd the subject of critical thinking. But these are the elements that seem to come up again and again. So let me just read this little statement to you, and then you guys can kind of see how complex, convoluted it is. Critical thinking is an exercise, sometimes referred to as a practice, that centers on the logical, disciplined process of actively and skillfully, now here's a whole bunch, conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information gathered from observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication, resulting in forming beliefs and taking actions based on rational analysis rather than emotional reactions. You guys are welcome to unmute and add to this or comment on the definition, but I'm just saying it's a rather big definition for a two-word sort of, exercise or practice. It's critical thinking. So I wanted to put this out in front of you so I could simply illustrate that all of you have come to this discussion, or those of you out there in the world of YouTube have come to watch this video with your own definition already in mind, how you went about interpreting those two words, critical thinking, and whether your meaning for it, your definition matches mine or resonates with this. My point is real simple. Everyone is coming to this with their own understanding of what that skill is, that practice of critical thinking. What I can promise you is that your definition, your understanding is a subset of what the full range of definition is going to include. And so as we work our way through this program, I'm going to go out there and place my bet that you're going to hear plenty of stuff that resonates with what you already think and know to be true. And you're hopefully going to hear some things that are going to add to that, expand that, refine that, and hopefully result in a more practical approach for applying critical thinking throughout your life. Questions, comments about that yet? Now, many of you on this call are not traditionally silent types, and so you feel free to unmute and chime in as I'm working my way through this. Thank you, Brian, Kathy, thank you. What would you guys like to add to this?
I can't argue with it. It's just so darn long.
Yeah.
But I can't argue with it. So yeah.
And again, I can compiled this from all of the definitions I stumbled across. So I did do some research, I did do some search, and I said, all I want is to know what the definitions are and who they came from. And as I was reading definition after definition, I kind of went like, well, let's blend these all together into a single statement and see where it puts us. So Brian, you've also unmuted. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to what Kathy just said. I can't argue with it because I think in any given moment, I think about our own neurobiology. There tends to be a gap between the subjective perceptions that we're always dealing with in terms of the things that could create some value and the objective reality of actually what would create value in any given moment. So this subjective objective gap is something that we have to reconcile in any given moment. And it's difficult without all of those elements that are described here in critical thinking.
Yes, 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 yes. And so that's why I thought like, well, we can't do this in a single change grid or cover the subject in a month. It's just not possible. This is a very detailed program that we've presented countless time over the years. I'm not going to drag you through all of it, obviously, but I want to make sure that we're doing a good job of this because this critical thinking skill set is so important, not only generally, but because as we get to the part I pointed out about giving you the testing provocation and doing a critical thinking exercise, we do need to understand that we have, those of us that are in the United States, have a very big decision heading our way in a handful of months. And while we never allow our calls to become political in nature, there are still very specific behaviors that we can observe in the media, in presentations, in whatever it is, that very much resonate with what we're going to be describing. And so we want to make sure everyone's equipped to make the best quality decision they can based on the information available to them at that point in time. Tom, if your hand is up, you're welcome to chime in anytime you'd like. What would you like to add?
Well, my thinking is I'm a little bit confused or uncertain about the critical thinking concept from two standpoints. One of the things that I pay a lot of attention to, which hopefully helps me operate from a point of humility, is psychological research tells us that about 95% of our behaviors our reasons for those behaviors are completely unknown to us.
Yes.
The second thing, and this comes from Dr. Candace Pert and Dr. David Hawkins, that so much of our perceptions are created in the first 7 years
Yes.
of our life. So, so many of our basic beliefs are really formed before we ever get to the critical thinking part of our lives.
You are absolutely correct, and we'll be doing quite the dive into that exact subject. Yeah, because again, I see a couple of fundamental flaws in critical thinking as it's being promoted and presented out there today. I think it's missing a couple of really vitally important elements. And until those elements can be explored and dealt with, I would suggest to you that someone's ability to improve their skills in critical thinking or to actually perform a good quality critical thinking exercise or experience are compromised. And so that's what we want to really, I think, put our energy into. So anyway, just for all of you to join in, the definition is cloudy at best, but there are some things that do come up in it that I think we can just kind of extract very quickly, that it is more about logic than it is about emotion. It is about gathering information to get as complete a picture as we can for doing things. As you start to learn about the kinds of principles and skills that are taught in critical thinking, it is talking about being open to other perspectives, open to other ideas, willing to hear whatever information there is to be heard and to process that information in a way that's going on. So there are some consistencies that are working throughout this, which got me thinking about this question. If this is something that we're saying people should do, what we're kind of simultaneously saying is that we've noticed that some people really do this kind of thing. We've noticed patterns in people's performance when it comes to making higher quality decisions. Can we identify what some of those patterns are? Can we figure out, is there an actual sweet spot for critical thinking to occur? And for me to be in that sweet spot, what do I have to know? What do I have to be able to do? What do I need to understand, hold dear, et cetera, et cetera? And so that got me to this question. If there does exist a natural set of circumstances under which critical thinking spontaneously occurs, where on the change grid would that be? Now, I know that many of you on the call and who are listening to this recording are not as fluent in the change grid as several of the master practitioners and master consultants in ChangeWorks that we have on the call right now. No, but we can tell you that there is a certain energy that's going to help someone make these highest quality decisions in the reasonable amount of time and do it in a way that's natural, easy flowing, etc. And so for everyone's benefit, I'm just going to quickly describe what the four energies are. And then I'd like you to tell me, of those four energies, which ones do you think are in play when it comes to something like critical thinking, however you define it. And so the four energies that we've identified, and it serves as one of the overlays on the change grid. You guys by now should be familiar with what you're looking at. This is, after all, exploration 7. So you've only seen this 6 other times, and you've seen it broken down layer by layer on many an occasion. So I just want to review with you that there are these 4 major energies that people experience about a particular activity. And so those 4 energies are, in fact, should I do as a test and throw it to you guys and say, what are the energies? Do you want me to do that, or do you want me to just rattle them off and move on? All right, if no one's unmuting and volunteering, I'm just going to rattle them off and move on. The driver energy is the one that wants to accomplish something. The driver energy is that energy that we have within us that is compelling us to move forward, do something, accomplish something, get something done, go somewhere, whatever. So we like that label for it being a driver energy because in the word itself implies that movement is happening. And so we're trying to make something happen. We're trying to get somewhere. We're trying to do something, accomplish something, whatever the case may be. Another energy that we experience is the analytical energy. The analytical energy wants to understand something. It wants to know something. So believing something isn't enough for the analytical energy. The analytical energy seeks to be sure of things. And so it wants to figure things out through whatever processes, procedures, routines, etc. It wants to gather all that information. It wants to process all that information, and it wants to draw from that information whatever insights, conclusions, etc. it can draw. So, but the big thing that's moving the analytical energy is not the desire to do something, it is the desire to understand something. So people that are analytical by personality, and personality is certainly something that we can see where it fits in as well, but people who actually live there, who actually are one of these legitimate analytical types, they don't really feel compelled to do something with what they understand. They're content to understand it. And so, job's done. I figured it out. I've solved the puzzle. I know what's going on. And so that's the analytical energy speaking. It wants to know something. Now, the amiable energy, this third one, we'll look at the amiable energy wants to care about something. So when we talk about the amiable energy, we're almost always talking about relationships, that the person is caring for others. Now, sometimes they're caring for themselves, so we could certainly say we could self-apply this, but more often than not, when we talk about amiable energy, we're talking about how we get along with people. We want harmony, we want peace, we want people to be included. We want people to feel seen and heard. We want people to be factored into whatever decisions are being made. And so the amiable energy wants to care about whatever it is that's going on. That's what's really at the forefront of that energy, to care. To care. And then this last energy we look at is the expressive energy. The expressive energy wants to feel something, and feeling something might be emotionally feeling something, but it can also be very visceral. So the expressive energy wants to have experiences. It wants to feel things it hasn't felt before. It wants to share those experiences with others, because this whole idea about being expressive, there's no point to expressing something if there's no one to be the receptor or the audience of whatever that is that's being put forward. So The expressive energy wants to feel something, and that feeling might be emotional. It might also be something that's more experiential. All right. So those are the four energies. Any questions, comments? Brian, you've unmuted. Anything you want to
I
add?
was going to suggest, it sounds to me that for me, critical thinking is not just one thing, right? It's an evolving process. And I think Tom made a very interesting point about how these perceptions are already formed because, that's the first order of business for the brain is to preserve and conserve energy. So it's very predictive in that way.
Yes.
And so it sounds, for me, sounds like critical thinking is this evolving process that's situational and it converges all four of those energies. Like you would need to not be necessarily detached, like you would need to be in a green
Oh,
circle.
and
Because if you're already attached to your perception as a stronghold, then you're not going to let in relevant information. You're not going to let in key elements that perhaps you need to explore. You need to be more analytical about. You need to
right.
uh,
And so
feel those kinds of things.
exactly. And so we're going to figure out where on the change grid that is, because then we can test everyone and say, where are you in comparison to what we've identified as the ideal kind of location? Tom, you go right ahead. What would you like to add?
I'd just like to jump and add to what he said is reminds me of how this would work in critical thinking is very similar to what you would see in situational leadership,
Yes.
where you would, it seems to me like you would apply different ones of the different types of these energies in different situational leadership situations.
Yep. And you may very well, because again, critical thinking is supposed to lead us to decisions and actions. And if I want to apply that then to things like leadership, parenting, whatever ring you want to attach to it, yeah, it's important that people be able to adjust things situationally. In fact, that's the whole point of the change grid period. We need to stop looking at people as though they're an it, and instead realize that people are responses to given situations. And I'll get to a slide in a second that says people are patterns. So yeah, we can find patterns do exist in sort of people, but ultimately the change grid says, no, let's look at the situation. Let's look at what the desired activity is, or the specific activity is, and figure out where on the change grid does that most naturally occur. And so now that we've reviewed those four energies, I want you to just think about this for a second, and then tell me. Critical thinking is going to require you to do certain things. Now, that critical thinking is either going to be governed by a primary driver energy, in which case we would be saying that the primary reason for critical thinking is because we're trying to do something. That's what the driver energy is all about. It says, my motivation is to get something done. My motivation is to accomplish something, to go somewhere, whatever it is. Does critical thinking have inherent within it this thought that there is purpose behind this exercise? Would you guys agree or disagree? Does critical thinking involve a purpose?
Yeah, I have a take on this, and I think that what other people have said, I agree. I think all four energies are the context for critical thinking and move us toward critical thinking. But in fact, critical thinking in and of itself is either an analytic driver or a driving analytic entity, because it is about movement towards something, but it's primarily an analytic approach to that movement, even though that analysis has been affected by and in the context of your culture, your values, a whole range of different things. So that's kind of my thought on this one.
Hey, you're absolutely on track with what we're doing. So, Tom, what would you like to add?
Nothing more. It seems to me that if you don't have a purpose, if there's not a reason, I don't think you get the energy to give the critical thinking but
Yeah.
we need.
Yeah, because if you're not critical, then you're just thinking. And so the moment the word critical comes into play, it says, oh, wait, something, for whatever reason, I don't know what's compelled me to do whatever this specific thinking is around whatever it is, but something is compelling me. So there's something I need to do. There's somewhere I need to go. There's something I have to figure out. There feels like there's a real intention, a real purpose. And if I went again into the change grade layer by layer, I would say to you that we are at least in intention getting into engagement. So when I think about critical thinking, I have the intention to actively do something. So I'm hearing both those, that intention and that engagement to what's going on. I know I'm squiggling around on a very complex diagram. Most of you have seen this countless times. Those who haven't, don't worry about it. I promise you, it'll all become second nature to you in within a few of our webinars. Okay, anyway, so that makes sense. And so primarily, I would say the critical thinking involves a driver energy, an intention to accomplish something, actively doing something to go somewhere. Now, the secondary energy answers the question, how do I go about doing that? And so out here in this driver quadrant where I'm showing you out grid, this is where all that driver energy lives on the change grid, because the person perceives their ability as being on the high end of things and the challenge they face as being high as well. Obviously, there's a good range there. But nevertheless, these people feel that there is a need or an opportunity to progress, and they have the wherewithal to make that progress occur. Therefore, they're driven. But that driver can get to where they're going in a variety of secondary energies. So when it comes to critical thinking, do you think that that driver energy would be best enhanced by having a dose, an additional dose, if you will, of driver energy, expressive energy, amiable energy, or analytical energy? So am I going to do the best possible job of critical thinking by just having more driver energy and barreling through, just do it, whatever, figure it out? Or does that amount of intensity, that level of drive compromise my ability and my success in performing a critical thinking exercise? You don't have to answer that. Yeah, that'll be self-evident. We do that. And then we go like, well, maybe what I need is a little bit of expressive energy to do the best job with critical thinking. The expressive energy wants to feel something. It wants to experience something. Maybe we need to be enthusiastic and inspirational and energized and all that. Does that help you in performing this skill, if you will, of critical thinking, or does that undermine it? If it's a secondary amiable energy, the amiable energy in the secondary position is saying, yeah, I want to go and accomplish something, but I got to accomplish it based on the people that are involved and how it's going to serve the people and how it's going to impact others and what matters to others. You know, there's this very kind of what do I say? Being supportive, altruistic, etc. Energy that does that help you make the highest quality decisions in the shortest amount of time, or is the secondary energy going to be analytical? So the analytical energy wants to understand something. It wants to know something. And so, as Kathy has already pointed out, and I'm open to anyone with other viewpoints on it, it is that analytical driver energy that is probably going to be where critical thinking most naturally occurs. And that's what we're looking for. We believe that every possible human behavior has a place on the change grid where it naturally happens. And so rather than trying to make ourselves do something, why don't we create the circumstances under which those energies are already in play in a successful way for whatever that particular activity happens to be? So yeah, now that I've said that though, there are two other energies we haven't spoken of in the secondary, in our results so far. Should we have a little expressive energy? Should we have a little bit of amiable energy, perhaps in a tertiary kind of position for what's going on? And you guys brought this up. Depending on what this critical thinking exercise is being done around, whatever the subject matter happens to be, we may very well need to appreciate how it affects other people. We may very much realize that the critical thinking is something that could be enhanced if we could get people to be a little bit more imaginative. Critical thinking, if it's based purely on what is already known, ends up exposing a lot of blind spots. And so maybe, just maybe, we need to have a little bit of that expressive energy to help us see new possibilities, to be interested in pursuing the unknown, that sort of thing that comes along with expressive experiences. So, but by and large, we are going to be in this analytical driver quadrant without hurting anybody's brain. Where my pointer is right now would be an expressive analytical driver, and right here would be an amiable analytical driver. The tertiary energies, although they are of immense fascination for a lot of ChangeWorks professionals, the truth is, from a practical perspective, I don't really need to bog myself down with identifying tertiary energies. I promise you, it's good enough to understand that if I can just put myself into an analytical driver state of mind, I am going to, by nature, already be well positioned for critical thinking. It's already happening here. Now, Kathy also mentioned that there could be a driven analytical. That would just be moving down one more spot. I don't disagree with that. It could absolutely be the case. But because critical thinking often carries an element of urgency with it, that whatever it is we're trying to figure out now for a reason. It's just not an academic sort of an exercise. We're trying to figure something out. We're trying to make a decision. We're trying to get something done. And so there is a little bit more of a sense of urgency. I think people should enter a critical thinking exercise in. So that's why I'm going to favor analytical driver. So Tom, Tim, you guys are both unmuted. You're welcome to chime in whenever you'd like. Actually, Tim, you're still muted, so just unmute. But Tom, go ahead.
I'd like to know what you think about. I happen to believe what others researchers have said about emotional. That at the root of every decision is an emotional reaction. We never get away from the basis of having an emotional feeling,
right?
A decision, and so it seems to me that in any critical thinking situation where we've got other human beings involved, I think we've got to be aware of, sensitive to how we can get our point across best,
yes,
with an understanding of others' emotional mindset.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. One of the slides I'll be using later on in the program says that emotions are the enemies of critical thinking. And so it is very often the problem with critical thinking. I told you from the beginning that I have some inherent issues with the concept, is that I don't believe that people are ready to do critical thinking until they have their own understanding of their own emotions, their own, and it's more than emotions, but their own mindset before they do that. To your point, though, more scientifically, one of our master consultants is Brian Sykes. He's on the call, and he's also a physician. So he seems to be our default go-to guy when it comes to anything having to do with neurotransmitters and things emotional. What I would just throw out before Brian makes whatever comments he'd like is that we aren't so much concerned about all emotions. We're concerned about emotions ruling the day. And when it comes to critical thinking, we want it to be logically ruled, not emotionally ruled. And so And we'll get into that in grand detail, but it's also, we have to take a closer look at which emotions do we need to be concerned about. So for example, if I'm doing a great job of critical thinking, I no doubt have some feelings while that's going on. Hopefully what I'm feeling is confident. I'm feeling capable. I'm feeling clear about what's going on. I'm feeling safe enough to be able to do what's going on. And so these are all variations on, well, we ultimately take it back to pride, but it's about being confident, about having enough awareness of yourself, your abilities, your role in whatever's going on, that you can do this this exercise with the faith that it's going to come out the right way. And so there's lots of other variations on that emotion that I'm describing there, but that emotion is there. Nevertheless, when people are in this place on the change grid, if I were to ask them how they're feeling, they may say some of the things I've just rattled off, but I will tell you that when you're here on the change grid, that's not front and center in your mind. What's front and center in your mind are the logical elements, the tasks that need to be done, the things you're engaged in. And someone comes along and say, you should feel so proud of yourself. And they kind of go, okay, yeah, I guess I should. I guess I do. I really, it's not where the attention is being placed when you are in this driver kind of area on the change grid. It's more about confident forward movement. That being said, we always have to be cautious about what happens at any extreme. The driver energy to an extreme ends up here where I'm squiggling on the change grid. This is the outgrid danger zone. It is the home of all of the dark side of the driver energy. So it's not about being confident, it's about being arrogant. It's not about willing to step up and do what needs to be done. It's about triggering fights. So this is too aggressive. This is too domineering. This is too involved, too pushy, too all those kinds of things. And if that's your mindset when you're trying to figure out the right thing to do and the right way to do it and the right timing for doing it, hopefully you guys can hear that that extreme mindset is going to be damaging to the actual results that you're pursuing. Thoughts about that?
So T, the comment that I was going to make is, I would have said that critical thinking resides downgrid. So the discussion that the primary energy is driver energy is interesting to me, because I would say that the primary energy happens down.
Yeah. Well, so let's explore that, because first of all, critical thinking, or how about this? I would say to you that someone who is further downgrid is intellectually better equipped than perhaps the people that are outgrid around, the drivers. Why am I saying that? Because they perceive their ability as being just as high, but they perceive the challenge as being quite low. And so when I think about what people that are downgrid are thinking about, how their thoughts are actually happening, if you look at the levels of tension, they're down here in power, apathy, and apathy. They're thinking just because they felt like thinking about something. It's more like it's something they're doing to pass the time, or something they just do all day, every day. There is not the level of intention or engagement around those thought processes that someone who is in the driver area, driver energy, is all about. So yeah, people that are downgrid can do a great job of thinking, but they're not thinking with any purpose, intention, whatever. The moment they do have a purpose or intention, they automatically move up, because that saying I have a purpose or an intention, just those words imply that I have a little bit of a drive energy going on. So Tim, I think you're resonating with what Kathy alluded to earlier, and that is that, well, you could be an analytical driver, but you could also be a driven analytical. And both of those energies working together are what's really involved. I guess the question is there a sense of urgency if I'm really in or how does the sense of urgency and driven analytical experiences versus the level of urgency that an analytical driver is experiencing? And so I would put forth that ultimately, when it comes to real critical thinking being applied, a little bit more tension would be a good thing. I also want to point out that you could build a case that critical thinking is at its best at the center of the change grid where everything is balanced. And I could go into in grand detail, but I would say to you that this is the place where observation is at its absolute best. But it's a place of being neutral, detached, objective. It's a great place to allow information from any and all sources to enter your thoughts, your awareness, but that's all that it does. When you're in the center of the change grid, and I'm talking about the exact center, part of the area we like to talk about is inside the green circle, and that could be a very nice spot when it comes to the early stages of critical thinking. This individual at the exact center of the change grid is gathering information, observing everything, processing and understanding it, but not necessarily doing anything definitive with it. So they really aren't in motion yet. If I could add a little bit of driver energy, that will start. But ultimately, for them to do the absolute best job of critical thinking, appreciating time constraints, urgency, etc., we're doing it on purpose. I'm going to suggest that the analytical driver energy would serve us best, although there are other areas on the change grid which could still result in high quality thinking, but not necessarily with the timeliness, the urgency, the mission, the importance that we might be attaching to critical thinking. Does that resonate with anybody, or am I just babbling like usual?
No, I think that's spot on because, again, when we're talking about emotion, we feel before we can actually rationalize and reason as to what we're feeling. I always like to say, when you look at from a nervous system perspective, that the mind is playing catch up to where the body has already been. Because, that's why, you can touch a hot stove. You don't have to sit and think about, oh, I'm touching something hot. You can respond.
Right.
So again, we have 10 times more afferent neurons. These are how the body and the brain processes sensory capacity. You have 10 times more afferent than efferent.
Yep.
And so it's not just having an emotion, but it's like, what is this emotion for? What is the emotion about? What do I need the emotion to do? Which is why emotional intelligence is say, okay, yeah, self-awareness is the key, because it's not just good enough to feel something. You have to know why you're feeling it. What did you need it to do?
Yep.
What's the result of it? So it's the same thing when we think about critical thinking. Okay, we have, this emotion, but I like the idea of being logically ruled, because emotion, there's always this debate about, do we think first and then feel? Those systems work together.
Right.
And there's a balancing of them, not equal balance, but a balancing of them. But if you're too overwhelmed with emotion, you're not thinking reasonably at all.
Right. And that's the whole point of this. It's like we need to recognize that we have been gifted with emotions for reasons, each one with at least one specific reason why we have it. We don't have the emotions because we're supposed to experience them, all of them, all of the time. We just don't do that. There is a reason why we would be engaging a particular emotion, or why that emotion has been gifted to us. But when it comes to critical thinking, well, how about this? It's not called critical feeling. It's called critical thinking. So I'm trying to figure something out. I'm trying to whatever it is. Now, that then,
T, I was going to also say, what we don't talk about a lot is, you often hear dopamine as just a reward chemical kind of thing, but there's dopamine involved in that. Dopamine is involved in learning. Dopamine's involved in motivation. Dopamine's involved in curiosity, exploring.
Yep.
So, that kind of dopaminergic activity, as it's called, you need just the right amount.
Just the right amount. And that's the whole point, because too much is going to cause us a very, concerning problem, and depends what direction you move to do that. But let me show you this next little part, because I think that thinking in general, we've already talked about this, requires or benefits from having some structure. And whatever your problem solving methodology is, whatever you've been taught, you've learned, whatever it happens to be, obviously you appreciate the fact that structured thinking is going to lead to a decision a lot more comfortably than random thinking. And so having some sort of process is really good. And this is where I ended up with a real problem about how critical thinking as a skill set, as a subject matter, or whatever, is missing some really important points. So, in the path of self-discovery, which is our decision-making process we use, we start by looking at the current situation, what's happening right now, facts and figures. Obviously, when it comes to critical thinking, there is a great deal of work to be done at the current situation step. Then we get to the desired situation. What do you want and why do you want it? Now, if I were to follow most of the critical thinking outlines that I've seen, it basically says your current situation is that you're not as great of a decision maker as you would like or could benefit from being. And you want to be a better decision maker. You want to be a more critical thinker. You want to be better, better, better. And then they jump to solutions, how to go about doing that. So do this, practice this, gather this, blah, blah, blah. They're jumping over what we consider to be the most important step of the entire decision-making process. And that is identifying the obstacles. You've heard me say this countless times. You're hearing it one more time. If you know where you're at and you know where you want to go, we have to answer the question, why are you not already there? If you are not already there, it is because there is some obstacle or set of obstacles, real or imagined, that are in your way. And until these obstacles can be identified and dealt with, the chances of you reaching your desired situation are compromised. And so it is premature to do anything on the solution side until obstacles have been identified, because the real point of the solutions is to get rid of the obstacles. If there weren't any obstacles, you don't need a solution. You'd already be where you're trying to go. And so this is one of the things that really distinguishes the work that we do with ChangeWorks and MasterStream and all things tension management, is that we celebrate a spotlight being placed on obstacles because they are what it is we need to deal with. Again, obstacle or set of obstacles, real or imagined. And nevertheless, they are still barriers or, what do we say, stumbling blocks, whatever it is, on your journey between your current situation and your desired situation. What we find is fundamentally true about so many programs that are out there is they go current situation, desired situation, here's how to do it. And they jump into solutions. We believe that that's not doing justice to the student or to the subject matter, and it certainly doesn't bode well for their success moving forward. So here's what I'm going to say to you about critical thinking. That is that right now you have whatever critical thinking, understanding, and skills are that you have. When it comes to the desired situation, you want to be better at critical thinking. You do it more deliberately, more beneficially, whenever you really want. It is premature for me to teach you how to be a more effective critical thinker. It is premature for me to talk to you about becoming a better decision maker. And it's going to be, what do we say? I don't want to say it's a waste of time, but it is not a good use of time until the obstacles have been identified. And so I'm going to simply say that each and every one of you have your own struggles with critical thinking. Each and every one of you are patterns. You are a set of patterns, and those patterns can end up revealing obstacles of awareness, obstacles of ability, willingness, and suitability when it comes to being a better critical thinker. And so, as we always do, until we have helped you identify and deal with the things that are stopping you from being a better critical thinker, it is not going to be as effective or as beneficial for us to talk to you about how you could go about doing critical thinking more effectively. Now, along the way to you understanding what your own obstacles are, you are going to understand what I believe it was Tom who brought up early on when it came to the emotions that are involved. You know, critical thinking can happen in a vacuum, but if you want that critical thinking to result in any kind of change in life as we know it, other people are going to be involved, and they're going to bring to your thought, first of all, the mistaken belief that they are good critical thinkers, and their obliviousness to the obstacles that are already preventing them from being a better critical thinker. As Tom pointed out, 95% of the decisions that we make are happening without our conscious awareness or participation. It's just happening kind of automatically. And our thoughts, decision-making processes, etc., have been programmed into us, installed into us, and exercised so thoroughly within the first 5 to 7 years of life on this planet that we really have to do some conscious work if we really want to do whatever's going on. All right, so I'll pause there for just a second and just let you guys throw in some comments. Hopefully I said something that is both useful and provocative, but the bottom line is you got to get out of your way if you want to be a better critical thinker. I can't just hand you a skill set on critical thinking without saying first, you got to get
out. Can I ask Brian a question on that too?
Sure. Yeah.
So Brian, then would you say that critical thinking relies heavily upon the hippocampus?
Well, the hippocampus is primarily known for long-term memory, but that's a major structure in the limbic system. And remember, limbic system processes feelings, but there's also where dopamine is formed. You know, dopamine is formed in the brain, the gut, and even the retina. So you have this like reward processing center right there in the midbrain that'll send signals up in the efferent. So in other words, cognition, but also down in terms of actually doing something. So it takes advantage of or becomes the mediator spot for both feeling and cognition.
Yes.
So you have the long-term memory that's at play there, but then also working memory. So it's bringing to memory. That's why I said the brain is very predictive in nature, because that's what the hippocampus will always remind you of. Well, you have this strong pattern, this strong processing, this strong way, strong both synaptic kind of connection of looking at things. So what are you going to do with it? And it just presents the information. This is why you need critical thinking. But I think for me, T said the primary thing is, I always see in myself is that I ask the question is, how do I get out of my own way?
Yep.
That's the major question. I ask, what do I need to learn? What do I need to develop? And how can I grow? Those are 3 questions every day.
Right. And this is the whole point of the way that I like to do precision decision making. And, you know, these programs we've done over the years, you have to take responsibility for what you're bringing to that critical thinking process. And some of the things that you are bringing to that process could be absolutely beneficial and powerful and whatever, you know, praise you want to laud upon it. But you're bringing the rest of you with it as well. And while you've been very good at thinking up to now to end up where you are right now, I think, you know, one of the things we point out in precision decisions is that you are living proof that the decisions that you have made over the course of your lifetime have brought you to where you are right now. Right? You are where you are right now because of the decisions you've made over your lifetime. If you had made different decisions, you'd be someplace else. And so we need to kind of recognize that our involvement in our own decision-making processes and our own thinking, you know, critical thinking in the case of this subject, we bring us to it. And while we may be bringing some very good qualities, we can also be bringing some very problematic blind spots. And so we need to understand ourselves before we try to understand others. And that's what this first section is. Again, so we talked about people or patterns. Well, in the world of precision decisions, I identified Well, I identified really 10, but I think we're just going to be, no, we'll probably touch upon all 10 of them. But these are different constructs and structures that have been developed over the course of time by so many different researchers and disciplines and all that, that I think it's interesting to just take a moment to look at them and say, if I understand what these constructs and structures are, and I can apply my understanding to myself, I will be able to identify patterns in my own thoughts and behaviors that are ultimately going to impact how I go about making decisions and living life as we know it. Hopefully that's just interesting as I've thrown it out, but I'd like to, in the time we have remaining today, talk about what these 10 different constructs and structures are, and then talk about the first one and assign it to you as a little bit of homework. So constructs and structures, again, these are patterns in patterns that have been identified by different sources. So let's go down them. Elements of identity. And this, by the way, are in a very specific order. So this is where we start things with our elements of identity. If I ask you to answer the question, who are you? You know, if I just said, identify yourself, you're going to start thinking about and perhaps rattling off a bunch of elements that for whatever reason you've come to embrace, hold, accept as truth about yourself. So we'll talk about those elements of identity in detail in just a second, but nevertheless, just kind of know they're there. What are these elements of identity? Your brains are already thinking about, what does it even mean about elements of my identity? What's my identity actually built from? And where it came from and how I ended up here today, that's a different discussion for a different day. I want to know current situation. What are the elements of identity as you define them, as you define yourself using them? So hopefully that got you already provoked a little bit, but let's just rattle off these other 9. Meta programs. Meta programs, for the most part, come from neurolinguistic programming, and they basically say that when a human is first born, we pop out with just like a brand new computer. We have a basic operating system, and we are ready to receive data and programming. So we start to be trained very early on by whoever's around us, whatever it is, in how we go about processing the information in the world around us. What do we notice? What do we not notice? What do we put front and center? What do we subordinate? And these programs end up being things that are literally installed in us from a very early age, and we're going to continue to operate within these programs, run these programs over and over. Lots of things come into play that impact those programs and can change those programs, but nevertheless, you need to understand that as a human being, you have been programmed. And you are running these programs all day, every day, and you have been for always and evermore. So you got to understand, what about you are your programs? Because people start to believe that their elements of identity and their meta programs are the truth. And while it might be part of the truth for them, they are merely a subset of the truth that all of humanity would hold near and dear put together. From there, after you've recognized you've been programmed, those programs lead to you having not only cognitive biases, which we all have, but patterns in those biases you prefer, ones that you turn to most readily, most often. And so we'll be talking about the different cognitive biases. They've identified some 200 plus of them. We're only going to be talking about a dozen or so that are really very commonly encountered and very commonly run. Edie, you've unmuted. What would you like to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I think the programming begins before birth, though. In utero, there's been studies that, a real anxious mother, it'll carry on. And I personally did things with my kids to make one musical. I didn't with
Well,
so
interestingly
anyway, I just
enough,
wanted to say, I think we're a little bit programmed before we pop.
Well, in fact, let me just quickly go that your guys' homework is on elements of identity. And the elements of identity include the values you hold near and dear, your beliefs, your attitudes, personal experiences, cultural backgrounds, social roles, personality traits, mission and purpose, and this one right here, organics. So there are things that have been happening inside of your development from the moment of conception that are basically impacting how you are becoming as a human. So there are organic things that are in play as well. And some of those organic things continue to be issues well after birth. So people may have organic, what do I say, situations that are inherently impacting other things they do. But these are the things we would put into our elements of identity. And so I just wanted to jump ahead just to show, Edie, you're absolutely right. These things are organic in nature as well. Yep. Okay. So let's go back a little bit to talk about the rest of these. Heuristics are, I want to say, shortcuts that humans run in their thought process. And by the way, we do all these things. All these structures are really done because they are valuable to us in terms of making communication more possible, but they also carry with them their own blind spots. So yeah, I need to be able to do all these things that we're talking about so that I can operate in a reasonable kind of a way. But whichever set I've chosen inside of each one of these constructs or structures could very much be helping me in a given situation or working against me in a given situation. So to thine own self be true, then thou canst not be false to any man. So this is really a series of exercises I want to put you guys through so that you understand what your patterns are. So heuristics, again, our patterns. We'll talk about heuristics in details. We'll work our way through this. But the fast one I'll give you if you want to know what's a real heuristic. You decide to take a shower in the morning. How do you know when the temperature's right? Do you know the temperature is right because you set the dial in a certain position that you always know that if you put the dial there, that's the right temperature for you? Or do you go in there trial and error? I don't know. All I'm telling you is that you guys have each figured out how to effectively set the temperature of your shower. For me personally, I know it's where I set the dial. If I set the dial there, the temperature is going to be just fine. You may have your own way of doing that. Now, the problem with heuristics can be this. I go to a hotel, I'm ready to take my shower, and I set the dial to the same place that I do at home. Right, that may or may not work. And so heuristics are patterns that we use. There's a lot of them. We'll talk about them in detail when we get to that. Logical fallacies. As you go about processing information that you're gathering around you, you are going to apply logic to different elements of them. And if you apply the wrong logic to the wrong situation, you're going to end up with the wrong answer. And so logical fallacies are simply things that the human mind does, whether we've been formally trained in doing them or we've just absorbed them organically over time. There are ways that we use our brain to draw conclusions, etc., that may or may not actually give us the good ways of going about it. So those are the fallacies that's going on. They are mistakes in your logic. Now, when we start getting into now expressing what we have figured out in these first five, now we get into linguistic violations. Linguistic violations are a set of structures in the phrasing of our thoughts that reveal very useful information to people around us. Sometimes those linguistic violations are just fine. Other times they can be problematic. So for example, one of the linguistic violations, one of the titles for it is about the missing verb or an unspecified verb. So if I said to you, yesterday I had an accident. Right now, your brains are already going through the process of transderivational search, where you are adding meaning to each one of the words that I used. Yesterday, I had an accident. Now, yesterday is yesterday. Usually, we can get consensus among people about what we all mean by yesterday. I had, okay, something happened to me and it's in the past, so it actually happened. And then I said, an accident. I have not told you exactly what the accident was, what the verb was, whatever really happened. Nevertheless, your brains are triggered by that linguistic violation to go in there and add the missing information, add meaning. So now let me say to you guys, what happened to me yesterday? Okay, you guys can unmute and chime in if you want, but people are going to say, "Oh, you had a car accident. Maybe you fell down a step or whatever the case may be. Maybe you peed your pants." So these whole set of experiences that fall into the category of accident are all available to us. Sometimes we do that, but if I'm making one of these violations, and as the result of the violation, I am using incorrect or inaccurate information, I could end up making a very, very bad choice. And so now we get into reframes. Reframes are about changing the context that we place around the content. By changing whatever those reframes are, by reframing that information, we can kind of change the value, change the meaning. And one of the best examples of this that's given is about a villager in an old farming kind of community, whatever. And he has a son, and that son gets injured one day. Or no, he has a son, and the community says to him, "What a wonderful thing you have a son." Well, the son gets injured, and as a result, really can't do all that much. But nevertheless, the people say, "Oh, how terrible it is." Well, then war comes along, and because your son has been injured, they're not called into duty, and everyone says, "Oh, how fortunate for you." And so the meaning of a situation, having a son or having a son who had an accident, can be changed very quickly and powerfully by changing the frame around which we look at it. So in the frame of having a successful family farm, having a child with an injury could be viewed as a bad sort of a thing. But that same energy could save that child's life depending on what happens later on. You with me? And so change the frame, you change the meaning. Now, over the course of your lifetimes, you guys have all been exposed to these reframes. You may never ever learn. There are 13 reframes. You may never have learned them, but nevertheless, you've been exposed to all of them. And just by osmosis, you've picked up on them, and you may very well use them when you're trying to make a decision. And those reframes could end up changing the context of something to the point that it undermines the decision that you need to make. There's also framing effects, social influences, people are patterns. And so if we believe that X is good, like for example, one social influence that comes into play is that that capitalism is better than communism. Now, all of us who probably come from capitalistic societies go like, well, yeah, that's a kind of a given. Where did we get that from? So yeah, it became a belief or whatever, if you will, in the elements of identity, but it might have been a belief that was added later in life as a result of social influences, reframes, et cetera, is going on. And then last, that we'll look at are strategies of manipulation. There are a whole set of things that people can consciously, deliberately, intentionally do that are going to steer your mind. So you need to know when they're happening deliberately, but they also happen accidentally, inadvertently, just as part of regular conversation. We manipulate others. And so we need to be able to recognize which of these strategies of manipulation we use that are, when they're being used on us, etc. And so just to bring this to summary, I wanted to just illustrate my point that before you can be more effective at critical thinking, would it be good for you to know what your biases are, your logical fallacies, the reframes you use, the strategies of manipulation that are going on? Do you believe that these things are coming with you to that critical thinking exercise and are going to affect that critical thinking exercise?
Absolutely. In fact, Tim asked about the hippocampus, and because the brain likes to process things categorically, it's also going to remind you of the feeling that you have that goes along with those events in your mind, so to speak. And so, a certain song can remind you of certain things, and you didn't ask for it to remind you of it. You didn't ask for it to evoke that same feeling.
Yep.
So it just comes out of nowhere, and this happens all the time.
It does. And again, we want to say we are making the right decisions in the right time frame, et cetera. And I'm just saying to everybody, until you understand these elements about yourself, you could be very much getting in your way of making the highest quality decisions that you can. Once you know you're not in your way, or you know what to watch out for as you're just going about being you on a daily basis, well, fine, we can talk about here's some skills that will improve your critical thinking success. But I don't know that there's any point in me teaching you how to do that until you get out of your own way. So that's what this is really all about. Hopefully you view that positively, not negatively. But I hope you'll find these dialogues for the next several weeks about each one of these constructs and structures interesting. So I just want to leave you with what your homework is. Oh, by the way, if you wanted to really go through the precision decisions training, I would expect you to be able to rattle off these constructs and structures. You should know this stuff. But this is the oracle of the self. I just want you to be aware of this stuff. So you don't have to be super clinical and fastidious about the whole thing. I just want you to be aware of constructs and structures and how you've already got them and how they might be affecting your thoughts and abilities when it comes to making good decisions. Similarly, when it comes to elements of identity, while I could say to you, list 5 values that you hold, list 5 beliefs, tell me what your attitudes are when it comes to this, this, and this. Tell me about personal experiences that you've had that have molded you into being you. What comes from your your cultural background? What roles are you serving in society? What are some of your personality traits? If personality is really a thing, what are some of the traits that you hold near and dear? What are your mission and purpose? How does that contribute to you, your identity? And what might be going on organically that's also part of who you are? And come into that as well. So I don't care that you do all of these elements. I just want you to spend some time between now and our next session next Monday about who are you? How do you truly identify yourself? And pay attention as you're talking to other people or going to other things and you're introducing yourself. What are these elements of identity that you are sharing or you are hesitant to share because you're concerned about how they're going to be received? So elements of identity is where we're going to begin. Thoughts, comments? Brian?
This is going to be an interesting exercise here. I think I have multiple personalities.
Well, this is
Well,
it.
my Sifu or martial arts used to always whisper in my ear, too many minds, too many minds. Like
Too many minds.
Too
Well,
many
but
minds.
I think it's also just the truth of human existence. We can't just be one of these identification or set of identifiers. So, for example, I will tell you among my identifiers that, and my history shows this, I'm a successful professional trainer. All right, that's my identity. I can get up in front of an audience and I can hopefully engage them for an hour, if not multiple days. That's my identity. That's my identity. But absolutely just as true about my identity is that I am an introvert and I am happiest when I am alone. So
Yeah.
these two different identities that may very much represent me seem to be exclusive of one another, but nope, it happens to be situational. When I need to get in front of an audience, I'm going to get in front of that audience and I'm going to do the absolute best job I possibly can. Afterwards, please don't invite me to dinner. I really just want to go to my room and order a club sandwich. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
See, this exercise is similar to one we do in the DE&I space. And the model that we've used is one by 2 psychologists, Merritt Loden and Judy Rossner, called the 4 layers of diversity. But then there's another model out called the diversity wheel, and it includes many of the elements that you have here. And so in our space, we call them dimensions of diversity.
Dimensions of diversity. Okay, great. But it's all going to end up getting about you knowing you. So describing the you are, the you want to be. What are these elements of identity? What I will promise you is that ignore all the rest of these constructs and structures. The reason why this one comes first is because this is the stuff I guarantee you're going to bring to the table when it comes to critical thinking. So you're not a critical thinker. You're a critical thinker within your values, your beliefs, your attitudes, your experiences, et cetera, et cetera. You're a critical thinker inside of your identity. But to be a true critical thinker, you must move beyond your identity, because other values, beliefs, attitudes, etc., could open up your eyes to awarenesses, understandings, facts, and figures that could be very powerful when it comes to whatever it is you're thinking critically about. So,
Hey, T,
yep.
could you make the slide deck available?
I certainly can. I'm just kind of building it as we go along, but I'm more than happy to upload this to my Dropbox on on a weekly kind of a basis. Maybe I could do that inside of the YouTube video as well, so people can get to whatever these little handouts.
We just need it in order to do our homework.
Oh, well then that one I can do right away. I will send you guys the elements of identity. Yeah, can I do? Oh, I don't think it'll let me. I was going to drag it over to the webinar chat, but I don't think it'll. Yeah, PowerPoint won't let you drag a single slide. Oh, maybe let me do this one. Just a moment, chat amongst yourselves. Nope, it won't let me do it. All right, I'll email it over to everyone so you've got what you need for your homework. Okay, other questions, comments?
Thank you. I think this is
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay. Hope to have you all on next week's call, and do invite friends and family, please. I would like to watch our audience grow for the Oracle itself. Hopefully you guys see that this is something that the vast majority of people could benefit from hearing. And so invite them along. Share the links that I gave you. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye for now.
Thanks.
Have a great day, everyone.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
Steve.
everyone.
Thanks, Steve.